Me?
Everything just in a triple check.
No, you're really good.
Recording. Backup is good. Cool. Okay.
Bye.
I'm gonna move out. Yesterday she pulled the laptop and it fell on her head and the other one broke right next to it. Pretty sure I heard a USB crack right there, so you know.
But it's still working.
It's definitely still working.
Good.
Yeah.
Parenthood. You know, you're just watching this like new
Yeah,
parenthood. You're
it
like,
is
my
in the
kids.
beginning of
How
it.
old are your kids?
8 and 5.
Oh yeah, you're like
Yeah.
past the first
Past
5 years.
that, but it's definitely not any easier. It's just different.
Yeah.
It's just different. Yeah, and mine are like 2 caveman boys that just like attack each other and fight all the time.
Are they constantly fighting?
Yeah.
Like
constantly.
physically fighting or?
Physically, verbally, emotionally. They got all the warfare out there that they can use. It's horrific.
Yeah, I guess 2 boys. I mean, girls fight too. Let's be
Yeah.
honest. It's not really a gender thing.
It's funny because it's the same dynamic I grew up in, though. So like, I feel like I'm watching my my childhood, you know. And I'm like, okay, who do I side with here? Like, I have less compassion for the youngest because I was the youngest. I'm like rooting for the oldest. It's like, oh, what a nightmare.
You're like, why am I even? I have keys. I think in the carrier, in the front of the carrier.
Okay, cool. I have your phone
Yeah,
in
you
my
can use
back
my
pocket.
phone. Yeah.
Thanks for your time, Cory.
Yeah, nice to meet you,
Take
Tim.
your time.
Bye.
Yeah, take your time.
You can check for the keys. They should be there.
She just threw me a little wave.
Did she?
Yeah, I was like this, and she just like.
Bye, guys. Love you.
Love you too.
Oh, Tim.
Oh, those are my huge boots there.
That's how we get strong too. You know, when you're parenting,
Oh,
you're just
yeah.
like carrying a 30-pound baby.
Yeah, one
squatting.
arm is just like shredded, and the other one's a noodle.
And same with the legs, because
Yeah.
you like hold on one side. Oh goodness.
Yeah, I think you get like hip displacement from it just from like sitting like that with them rested.
Totally. Actually, I have this thing now when I lay on my back. It's like this stitch in the back of my shoulder. I'm like,
Right.
yeah, I think I might have a rib that's not in the right place
Probably,
anymore from
'cause you
pregnancy,
just, like,
and just
Adjusted for holding them.
that's awesome. It's so nice to have you here.
Very excited to be here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's been a while. I feel like it's been like a year since I've seen you.
Yeah, it probably has at least. Yeah.
At least a year.
Yeah. Because when did we do that training together? That was like 2 years, was it?
Yeah, because I was just pregnant with Joni. So it was the last time I saw you was July of last year.
Yeah.
So what's new? What's shaking?
What is new and shaken in my world? Lots of, I guess not a lot of new, but lots of, I think there's lots of excitement in my own life, just I think in my practice and what I'm doing, and yeah, in life in general. I think I'm excited about life. So
Cool.
yeah.
That's awesome. Can we talk a bit about your practice? Because
Yeah,
I
for
mean,
sure.
I know that you are you part owner of the Breath Integration
Yes.
Center?
Yeah. So I'm partners with Lynn Aylward. Yeah.
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 And so I actually only know a little bit about, I know that you do breath work.
Yes.
I know that you guys run lots of different workshops, but I personally want to know more about what you're doing over there.
Right. Okay. So, well, it's Breath Integration Coaching and Training Center. And so I have a private practice where I work one-on-one with clients. And then we have the training center, which we offer a 6-month self-empowerment training every year. And then within that self-empowerment training, we also train other practitioners to support that training. So people that want to become a breath practitioner, we train them in that as well, which that's actually starting in like 3 weeks. So that's pretty exciting.
That
Just
is exciting.
The rush of, pulling a training together. And Lynn has decided to pull back on teaching this year. So a bunch of the teaching load's kind of going on me, which I'm excited for. I feel like I'm ready for. But yeah, so it's a big energy to hold, and a big event kind of that going into it. Like once it's locked in and loaded, it naturally runs its course, but the build up to it is always really exciting. And so that's called the self-empowerment training. And essentially it's designed to empower the self, right? That's how you explain it. And really, through breath work and then a bunch of different modalities of counseling. I think the root of it is that we use that connected breath method. You have a breath integration group session every single week. And when I think of what that breath does, I always explain it as a form of meditation, it's like yoga. It's like that union with our higher self. It's a connection to the place where we're not our body, we're not our mind, but we're like the infinite. We can connect to the infinite being that we are. And so to me, it's like this little portal place that allows us to, speed up our own healing, get beyond our ego, beyond our conditioning, beyond all the things, the ways that we limit ourselves in our life. It's like our little access point to it. And, So.
Okay, so I have a question though.
Yes.
So with the breath work, the work that you guys are doing, are they big sessions? Like we're talking about an hour-long breath session?
Yeah, it's about a 35 to 40 minute where you're actually doing the breath part of it.
Oh, and so when people do that for 40 minutes and you talk about connecting with your higher self, is it like, do you just get into a different state from?
Yeah, like that's the best way I could explain it. Like what you're doing is you're superoxygenating your cells. You're dumping all the CO2 out of your body. Mm-hmm. So there's definitely some physiological things that are occurring. But what also happens is our mind can relax and we get into like a mild form of hypnosis kind of. Wow, and cool. So I think like the best way I can understand that, because I've been doing the work for 20 years myself. And if I think of like, what have I done consistently for 20 years? Well, every 2 to 3 weeks, I've had one of these sessions, and it's for me, it's been such a pivotal piece in my own healing and my own growth. And so, and what I get to see with the people that I work with, like sometimes I'll work with someone one-on-one for a year, 2 years, then they'll step into the training, and it just kind of like fast tracks everything that they've been working on, because you're just immersed in it. You're immersed in, you've probably done group work where you see the power of when we come together as a group, the healing transforms so much quicker. Yeah. And so I wish I knew exactly what occurs with that breath, but I just know it. It's a way that access point kind of opens up to, maybe it's our subconscious that we get to kind of go from being the programmer. We actually get to change the program that's running on a quicker, sped up pace, so that we can experience more joy or more peace. I also think of it like this, the self-empowerment training is like spending 5 months where we basically just injecting love into our life, rather than focusing on, diminishing fear, or like it's really not fear focused. It's more focused on injecting ways to find self-acceptance with ourselves, ways to be compassionate, ways to have love for ourselves. And as we inject that, there's only so much room within us, right? And so something has to go. And what happens is a lot of that fear-based thinking or the conditioning starts to dissolve. And then ultimately we feel more free to be who we are in our life. Yeah.
That's so powerful. I mean, so, and you see change with people. Like so how long have you been part owner of Breath Integration? So
I did my teacher's training in 2007, and it was, I believe 2008 was the beginning of when Lynn and I ran our first training. So, it's been over 2000, so it's been 12 years or 13 years.
And you've been doing this regularly.
Yeah, and so in probably the first 6 or 8 years, I had my construction and excavation business. So Lynn took the majority of the work on, and I worked out of town a lot, or what,
So you were in construction and excavation.
Yeah. So
that's a huge shift to go from that to holding space and doing in front of people, self-healing.
It's the two dramatic ends of the spectrum, right? And so I've been doing it full time for about 4 or 5 years now. But yeah, in the beginning, I owned this construction business, and I would work out of town a lot. I'd come in and for different parts of the training, but I'd never actually been there for the whole experience until about 5 years ago that I committed to just one career. Wow. Yeah.
That's really cool, Cory.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty exciting.
I was thinking when you're talking about the breath and what happens, I focus a lot on the nervous system. That's a piece that I'm personally really interested in, and I've been doing a lot of research and training around how do we regulate our nervous system, and then the nervous system's impacts on mental health.
Right.
And so when you're talking about breath work, my mind goes to, well, yeah, I'm sure that we're just like calming the nervous system,
right,
which helps us move out of that space of analyzing, being on alert, being in this cognitive space, that we can actually be in ourselves and our bodies and start to think like, oh, what is it? Who am I really? And what is it that I really want out of this life? But we can't get there unless we feel safe and regulated. And
and so I think that's the breath is such a beautiful regulator, right? It's just so, and when we breathe properly, when we, because through trauma and stuff, we learn to just breathe at the top half of our body, right? And when you breathe, like you see your daughter, she probably, when she's breathing, her belly button's going in and out, right?
Yes.
And the same with both my boys, they have this full breath, and when we connect back to that, it's just this natural like calming that occurs within us. And then from that state is, you're right, where the healing can actually start to occur, right?
And we can't get there if we're being programmed by, or we're being run by our trauma, or we're in a state of trauma all the time.
Right.
I even think about, for me, since I've become a mom, my breath, I've been connected with my breath as a yoga teacher. But becoming a mom, when in my breastfeeding journey, I struggled with breastfeeding for the first 4 months, like really, really struggled with it.
Yeah.
And I didn't have enough milk, and my letdown wasn't coming. And then it was like one day I realized I'm not really breathing. Right? Because it's such a stressful situation. You have all this pressure. You're not sleeping. It's first, and then I just really, and still to this day, if I'm not having, the letdown's not coming, Joni's not getting milk, and I'm like, breathe, Deandra. And I take one breath and boom. And so that's been the biggest evidence to me, like how impactful our breath is. I'm like, wow, one breath, and then my milk flows.
It's free. And that's
crazy.
So interesting how we, so many of us walk around through our life with that half breath, and then therefore everything we're doing, we're actually not present with it because we're held by our stress or by our fear or whatever it is.
Wow. I've had one breath integration session with a practitioner in town years ago, and it was, and I don't know if they were trained through you guys, so I think it was breath integration, but it was like a 40-minute breathing, like circular breath. It was crazy. And when I started, there was it was quite a bit more dramatic than it is now. It's a very much more gentler process than even when I started doing it 20 years ago. And I don't know if that was just naturally how it's shifted or what, but there was quite a bit of dramatics when I first started doing breathwork as well. Like, whereas I would say it was crazy, whereas not often are the sessions, in what we do now, it's not quite as crazy, as dramatic as it used to be, I guess, or the way that I even learned how to do it. It's quite a bit more gentler process, which is probably better because our systems do better when there's a safety, a gentle.
And so that was what we've connected with Lynn and myself, my teacher Susan Hunes, the shifting it from that, like exactly what you said, from getting, I think it used to be a little bit more dramatic, and there was a lot of fist pounding into the mat and hollering to let things go, but it also, when we're in that activated state, then we're in the stressed state, right? And so our focus is more so to keep us out of that stress state and surrender deeper, so
cool.
It's a beautiful thing that I feel like it just kind of happened in my life. It wasn't something that I searched or was like made happen. It's just something that occurred. And then for me, as I shared, had that construction business, well, I always felt this pull or this feeling like I knew I needed to do this. It was like, didn't make sense in my head why I needed to do it. Nothing logical was happening for me with why I would make that transition, but it was something that kind of, I just felt pulled to, Wow. And I never really felt like I wanted to be the owner of the business or even be a practitioner. I just always loved knowing more for myself and creating more peace within my own self. And then naturally, here I am.
Cool. So you started off as a client or someone who was practicing. And then eventually moved into this place. So my question for you is, how did you even get to breath integration? Like, where were you before you made that shift?
Well, I actually had a friend, one of my closest friends to this day. His mom was doing breath training because there used to be a center not far from here. It was just like by the Continental Barbershop. Downstairs there was the breath integration center. I can't remember what it was called back then. Anyway, his mom was doing the work, and his mom we'd kind of always be partying, and we'd be partying at their house. and his mom would be hanging out upstairs, and I always end up sitting in the kitchen with his mom talking spirituality and philosophy and all this stuff. And then eventually it was like, well, you should just come try one of these sessions. And I was probably about around 20 years old and was feeling, I think I was just a little dissatisfied with my own life and felt like I wasn't in a real awful place, but I really wasn't in a place of peace, or I felt like I was missing some understanding, like I was missing something in life. And so I went and tried a session, and I really didn't even know I'd never done any formal form of counseling or anything, but I knew when I walked out of there, and it was after doing the breath, I was like, I don't even know what happened, but I feel lighter, and I feel my mind was quiet, like I could hear in my mind for the first time ever, and was like, wow, I got to go back and try that again. And
at 20 years old.
At 20, yeah.
Wow.
And so
cool.
then I just kept going back, because every time I did, I felt more peace. Right? And that was when I did all my trainings again, was in search for more peace or quiet within myself. So, and
following that voice, that
intuition.
And
following that intuition, that echo that was always saying, like, when I was operating my construction business and really successful at it, and I knew I was like, okay, this is success, this is what it can look like, and it can grow from here, yet I felt really this feeling of unfulfillment with it, with what I was doing with my time and with my energy. And I was like trying to work on, like, okay, it's not about the space, you can just change your mindset about it, like, and then eventually I was like, okay, no, this feels like prison, I have to do something different. And so I made a pretty big leap when my children were young, and like lots of things didn't make sense as to why you'd go like, I'm gonna go open people's chakras for a living now. It's like, yeah, that's you're gonna do that. And my parents like, oh, how are you gonna pay your bills? I'm like, I haven't figured that out yet, but I'm gonna go do it.
But look at you now.
Yeah, and here we are 5 years later, and it's feels like it just feels, I don't know, it's exciting, because 5 years later, the business that I feel like before I had put no energy into creating the business, or like there was no, I don't know, it just was this thing that was occurring naturally. And now I feel like so much has shifted within my own self-acceptance of me as a man, and really understanding what the power of what we are doing there, and then being able to like share that with more people and feeling excited about it. I just feel like we're like at the bottom looking up on a lot of really wonderful possibility for just for a really fun career and a fun life,
and creative,
and I never thought I was creative. I never thought I was that kind of person. I thought there was that kind of person, and so I never thought I was that person. And then I realized, oh, here I have been that person all along, right?
Yeah, just running a construction and excavation business, which is like, that's such a, I've already said this, but it's such a crazy contrast to go from construction and labor work to opening people's chakras for a living, and as a man, right? So I'm curious. I know that, so you have a podcast.
Yes.
Or you did?
Yes. Yeah, I've done it a few times. We haven't done it for probably like a year or so, maybe even longer than that.
But what was the podcast? It was specifically...
It was called Be a Man.
Yeah.
The Be a Man podcast. Yeah. And so, well, if you want to go back to the interesting perspectives of the two worlds, of like this construction world and then me opening people's chakras for a living, it was such a, like, for me, it was in my mind, I thought, okay, well, I just got to, like, it's just like any other business. I just got to put my energy into that business. But so what I'd realized in my own healing journey and my own self-acceptance as a man, that this was, a lot of what was occurring with my construction business was conditioning from my own past, from my own unhealed, unaccepted version of myself. And that, ultimately what I could see when I went to go let go of my construction business, what I was chasing was actually a relationship with my father through this construction business.
And was that something he did as well?
That was something that he did, right? And that was something that I remember as a young man wanting a connection with my father. Well, he was on the road working. So I was like, okay, this is how I'm going to get it. And this is all not conscious thought, but like naturally a human being trying to find, searching for love or connection. That was kind of the path that I ended up on. And I didn't really realize that until I went to make my career change. And I was like, I was facing all this self-rejection, and then like, you know, the identity as a man, and, you know, all the men in my family, they're miners, loggers, blue collar, you know, that's the world we come from. And so if I was to let go of that business, that was a huge piece of my identity as a man, of what I was letting go of as well. And then I was, you know, feeling these feelings that didn't make sense for me. Like, whereas when I would have to, you know, because the process of letting go of the business was part of, like, people would call and I'd say, I'm not doing that anymore, you know? And the feelings that would come up for me is like, I'd be worried like I was disappointing my own father through, and it was like this weird thing that was within me. I'm like, wow, this is way deeper than I actually thought it was. So I thought I was just changing careers, but really I'm like having to find self-acceptance as a man.
Of who you really are.
Of who I really am. Not who I'm conditioned or who I think I'm supposed to be or what I need to do to receive love or to be accepted.
Or to fit in with the family.
To fit in, all that stuff, right? And this is all stuff that I'd made up in my own mind, but it was unconscious, right? It was just, it doesn't show up until you start to make changes or take leaps in your life. You start to realize, there was a reason I was doing that thing.
Mm-hmm. And so, you build that awareness too, because that's a big piece. Because we all, I would say not all, but a lot of us, when we start on this journey of healing or understanding the self, or you go to counseling, or you show up at a yoga class, and that ignorance, right, until you get to that point. And then all of a sudden you start unpacking yourself and you're like, oh crap, like I've been behaving in these ways because of this or because of that, and we start to develop an understanding, but and then it becomes this big hole. You're like, holy smokes. But until you get to that point, so, you know, people who are listening might think like, what, we do things based on our family story, but you know, we do things in our lives or make decisions through these unconscious ways that are created for many different reasons, right? Yeah. And so when we start to unpack that, and you're right, when we start to make changes, this stuff comes up. Right. And so that was the echo of the self that I was like following. My true self was saying, you need to go and do this training, you know? And I was like, I don't know why I'm doing this training, but okay, I'm doing it, you know? And continuing to follow that echo of my higher self, my true self, the actual person that I am, versus, you know, the world that I came up in or the way I was conditioned because of society. That's a huge leap, Cory. Yeah, it was like, I remember just like laying at night being like, okay, what's the worst that could happen? What's the worst that could happen? You know, like, I'll just buy another backhoe and start another backhoe business. It's okay. You know? You're like, okay, I can always go back. I can always go back if I need to. I had to go, you know, a lot of people think, oh, well, how do you think positive? I was like, give me the worst. Give me the worst possible scenario, you know? And I just had to play that in my mind so that I knew that I would be okay no matter what. But I also knew, like, the other worst was to never take a leap or never do it, and then just get old and be like, oh, I never did that. I wonder what that would have been like, you know? And that's really difficult. And that's an important thing, I think, to ask ourselves regularly. And I understand that not all of us have the privilege to make those big leaps or things at certain times in our lives, but to ask ourselves, like, what's that thing that I'm not doing? Yeah. That I'm going to be thinking about when I'm 70 years old that I didn't do. Yeah. Yeah. So it's been a fun little process, I guess, or big process. It's a big process. Because I really didn't, I was so uncomfortable when I made the transition to, like, not be working 9 to 5 or, well, like 7 to 6 or whatever the construction hours are, you know. It was really uncomfortable. I realized, like, my biggest challenge wasn't doing the business that I wanted. It was just dealing with myself, not identified as with what I thought I was supposed to be. So that shift in identity, the shift in your purpose or how you're being purposeful in society. Yeah. So would you say that was one of the most challenging periods of your life? Yeah, I think that, like, that has been one of many challenging places, and I think that really the transition point. So when my second son, like my first son was born, and that's when it really started to get highlighted with me. So when Jack was born 8 years ago was when I was like, okay, am I gonna tell my kids to follow their dreams while I don't do mine, or am I gonna be the parent that just does
Like I was like, I know what my dad told me to do and what my dad did. And I did what my dad did. I didn't do what my dad told me to do, right? So if I'm going to be here telling my kids to follow their dreams, but then I'm going to be like, hey, you know what? This was my dream and I never followed it. Right. Then what kind of parent am I going to be, right? And so then after my first child, my wife Kyla had gone through some pretty heavy postpartum. And then when Bo was born, my second child, I was it was like, so we did 3.5 years with Jack. I was working both businesses, gone a lot. I had this really great contract for my excavation business. But when Bo was born, it was like Kyla just hit a wall. She phoned me one day and was just like, we're not doing this. And I was like, and I knew it. I just like shut my back off, and I knew that I would probably never run that thing again. Like it was like a turning point in my life. And it was just like, I parked it and never really looked back, right? Wow.
So Kyla, so Bo being born and Kyla saying like this double thing.
Yeah, like she
too much for the family.
It was too much for me to try and, because I'd work construction during the day, try and see clients at night.
Oh gosh, Cory.
And yeah, it was nuts. And then having one child, and then having a second child, and Kyla, I was praying for like the thing that would give me the courage to take a leap, And little did I know it would be my second son. That was like, he showed up and it was like, okay, I'm ready to do this. Again, it doesn't make sense when you're in the middle of your life and you got 2 young children and you got to spend a lot of time raising them and, to shift careers and try and start another business and all that, or not start another business, but at least try and make a go of a new career in the middle of it all. But it was exactly what I knew I needed and I knew I needed to do. And I think it's interesting because I always used to think of like watching Cesar Millan, the dog guy, and he'd always talk about you don't get the dog you want, you get the dog you need, right? And how he's what is he doing? Training people and rehabilitating dogs.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. It's with our children, I didn't realize how much they are our own teachers, or they come into our life to like help us heal again, right? Like I believe every relationship in our life is for healing. And so when those ones come in, they're like, there were lots of things that parents talked about, or people had talked about how hard parenting would be. And I'm like, hard, like shovel gravel? I can shovel gravel. That's manageable. I can do that. No problem. Hard.
I can do sleepless nights. I can do this stuff.
Yeah. Emotionally face yourself every day. Can you do that though? It was like, oh, I didn't know it was gonna be hard, like that kind of hard, like, I had no idea it was gonna be that kind of hard. So way different than shoveling gravel.
Yes.
So like I didn't realize that the learning that would come from parenting on that level, right?
Yes.
But yeah, they really cause you to be in integrity with your own self if you want to. You want to have children that are in integrity with themselves, right?
Yeah, and if you want to build the life that you want for your kids. Like, for me, I went into private practice after I got pregnant, after I had Joni. But as soon as I got pregnant, I started to think about this, and I was like, oh, no, okay.
Right.
Something's got to shift, which, again, it's not the most ideal time.
Right, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But like,
shouldn't I have started this way before so it'd be all set up and ready so I could
Yeah, shouldn't I have done that so that I had the financial security? And, there is a part of me, and I'm sure you, that's like, I need to be stable and secure for my children financially. And that's the smart thing. And that's the stuff that I know I've been told as a person, when you become an adult. But when I became pregnant, and even when I've had Joni now, for me, it's like life got really real. Like, what life are you living now? Yeah. And who do you want to be for your child?
Right.
And what lifestyle do you want? And the same thing about living in integrity. And I think in reality, if we go inside when we have kids, we're actually being called to figure out who the heck we are.
Totally, yeah.
Right? And you have, and sometimes we don't. And I'm not sure that we actually figure it out entirely. No. So I want to be as it's not like this linear process where you're like, this is who I am.
Got the answer, done. Perfect.
It's always changing. But I think for me, as becoming a parent was this spiritual call to really figure out what matters to you and what are the things that you're willing to put your energy and time into and what things are you not.
Yeah.
What people are you willing to put your time and energy into? What people are you not?
Yeah.
And that's the thing that parenthood has offered me, at least in the last year.
Yeah. Same here. And it's been an evolving process for 8 years now, where it's just slowly gets more. I don't know. It just evolves, I guess. But
and then they start talking and
yeah. And then you're like, these people with personalities. Like, who are these people? They live in our house now.
Triggering you left, right, and center.
I was like, oh, I didn't know I was gonna have to like face all the things I didn't face as a child again with my children. Just like, okay.
Have you read The Conscious Parent?
Yes. Yeah. I love that book. That's a really wonderful book. And
I'm in the process of reading it right now.
Yeah.
Both me and my partner, Tim, are.
Right.
It's an amazing book.
Yeah. For me, it was a huge, I had heard Dr. Shefali on Oprah's, one of her Super Soul Sunday talks or something like that. And a friend of mine had given me the book before my children were born. And then I read it, I believe it was a year or two ago, when I was facing a lot of my oldest son I was feeling a lot of fear. I think feeling a lot of fear, and in ways that I was afraid for him, but afraid it was triggering my own experience, right? And so when what she helped me do was really understand that, like I'd shared with you, is that they're here to help us heal. And I can't see my children who they are if I'm stuck in my old trauma or my old pain, mm-hmm. right? And my oldest son brought up a lot of my old trauma and pain when he was, 4 or 5, and it had nothing to do with him. It was all about me.
He was just being him.
He was just being him. Mm-hmm. But my inability to accept myself caused me to, in a sense, reject him. Not like I pushed him away and actually rejected him, but it would trigger me in a way that I couldn't no longer see him for who he is.
Right. Create distance or judgment or reaction.
Reactions, and get me into that triggered state all
mm-hmm.
the time, right? And when I could really understand, like, oh, this is about healing me.
Mm-hmm.
All I have to do with him, love and acceptance. That's it. That's all that he needs. He doesn't need to be told how to do it, what to do. That's all he wants is love and acceptance. And so if I can't do that with him, then what's in me that he's like prigging that thorn of rejection within my own self. And that's, my own healing of my own story allows me to be closer with my children, which is like, who thought?
And also all the time on, an all the time process.
Yeah, like 24/7, 7 days a week, yeah.
And that's a huge shift as a parent. I think for all of us to understand is how our stuff shows up in how we parent.
Yeah.
And how the piece that I've really been absorbing from that book is that our kids are themselves, mm-hmm. and then we like to tell them who they are.
Yeah.
Right. So we'll be like, oh, I'll say things and I'll catch myself. I'll say things like, Joni's so social, or Joni's so, but it's more about me defining who she is. Yeah. Like, it's one thing to say like how your kid is, but it's another thing to be like, oh, she's so much like me in this way, or she's so much like you. It's like this binary thing where we compare our children to their parents. Yeah. And then I'll say, or I'll say inside, not outside, but inside, like, oh, she's doing that because I do that. And it's like, wait, no, why am I looking at her through the lens of me? Yeah. When she's her own human, mm-hmm. and she might not be anything like me. Right. Yeah. Or anything like Tim, or she's going to be a little bit, it's, yeah.
It's good, that perception. Like, if I think she's like me, I'm going to see all the things that are like me. Right?
Of course.
But I'm not actually seeing her.
That's right.
It comes back to, when you sent me what we were going to, some of the questions that we might talk about today. And it's like, who are you? And I'm like, who am I? And that question, that, it's something I challenge lots of my clients with, to say, like, who are you? And I'm like, okay, well, I'm this guy that, here's all the things that I do. I run the Breast Integration Center. I'm a parent to a couple children. I'm a married man. Those are things that I do, or things that I'm involved in. But who am I in essence? Yeah. And so when we talk about our children, and we talk about that, the way we see them, and how when we see them as us, we see them on one level. But when you have those moments where you just look at them and you like feel this like feeling of love that is like, it's not your eyes seeing that child, right? It's something that's running, like it's like you see them like a God, right? With the love of whatever God or spirit or what, like this beyond humanness that you see. And so when we can see with that, and I believe that is like true love and acceptance for a child. I'm not seeing my child through my own story. I'm seeing them of the essence of what they are. And then that basically leaves them with no confines because they can be that, right?
And they're witnessed in that.
Yeah.
Which validates that in itself.
Yeah, which that it doesn't try to contain them, which is, when you ask me who I am, it's like, well, I'm an infinite being operating through this reflection of my body that is me, right? That's ultimately who I am, and the reflection of what I am and all these things that I do in my life are part of my experience of the expression of what my life is going to be, right?
And the expression of that being.
Yeah,
of
the being, which is like the higher self. We talk about breathwork, what place I want to connect to, the manager of it all, the real manager, And it's only in the last couple of years that I've really, even with my wife, I'm like, I know my wife, but I know the version of her that she maybe presents to me or that I'm able to see. But it's like, I want to know the infinite being that is my wife, right? Which I'm sure I do, but to consciously want to connect on that level with our partner, with our children, with the people in our life, it's like, how do I see not with the eye, but through the eye? Like, how do I see something bigger or more grand? And that's what opened up when you asked, who am I? I'm like, oh God, for a day and a half, I'm like, okay, that's the only way I could label myself as who I am is I'm that infinite being. And I think it's important for me to be able to connect to that place, because that's the only way I could transcend all my conditioning, all the stories, all the, that was part of the tool that I used to feel safe enough to make any change in my life or to truly accept myself.
So I'm gonna dig in with this a bit, because this idea of higher self, God, higher being, essence, for some people they're just like, right away. It's just it's
shuts
gone. It shuts off. And not for me, but I know that this is a difficult thing, because for some people this feels like a flaky thing or something
wooey.
that it's wooey.
Yeah.
But it's not, because when we think about connecting with ourself, and I know in our training we talked a lot about this, the things that we do that feel timeless, that feel we've all had that feeling at some point where you're just I don't know how to explain it, but you're
that's because you can't bring it to the mind level.
Yeah, you can't. Okay, there you go. That's right. You can't. It's this timeless connectedness, this experience. You talked about it when we see our children. We can feel it when we're doing certain things. Sometimes I feel it when I'm working with people or playing music or being out in nature.
Yeah.
Sometimes we feel it in meditation.
Yeah.
But we can call it God.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We can call it essence, we can call it higher self. But how do you bring this to the level of somebody that's showing up to you who hasn't had an experience of this higher being?
Well, I feel like I can really relate to it, because when I came to do breath work, one of the things, one of the teaching tools that they have is the Course in Miracles. That's Christian in statement. And so they started to talk about God. And when that practitioner would say God, I would just curl up and just want to run, I was just ugh.
Dogmatic religion. Bah!
Yeah, exactly. Right. This is this story, or this, you guys are believing a story about some guy that saved everybody. Sounds like BS to me. Right. And so, and through my own process of learning that, and then, I guess the part of it is we've all experienced it, right? We've all experienced some sort of echo within us that said, hey, how's this person doing? And then you trip over them, turning around the corner, or we've all had some sort of thing that was how did that actually happen? Everybody has a story where I have no idea how that happened. That's so weird.
Or multiple.
Or multiple. Yeah, they all
every
have
year,
multiple
every month.
stories of it going over and over again, right? And so it's well, what is it? And the way I had to explain it for myself for a long time is it's science. It's the law of the universe. It just works that way. But I wasn't going to call it God, because it was too dogmatic, or, you know, like it just triggered so much, right? And so lately I'm doing these videos from, so I'm sharing these lessons from the Course in Miracles, and I'm like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then, and again, the book's Christian in statement. So I say I'm going to do this. And then like every day I like open it up, I'm like, oh God, there's like God in that like 3 times. And I said I was going to do this 10-minute talk on whatever this lesson is about God. And I'm like thinking like, what does my family think? Oh God, he's on social media talking about God every day. Like what happened to Cory, you know? So it makes me so uncomfortable, but it's like, but at the same time, it's so like, call it the divine, call it whatever. Like, I don't know how to not make it wooey, but then like, it's also where so much of the power of healing occurs, you know, like to deny it, you know, I just read Ibn Alexander's Proof of Heaven, and he's a neuroscientist that went into a coma for a week, was totally brain dead. And for 7 days, he was somewhere else. And he came back fully healed. And like, as far as science, even how he got, how he contracted the illness, how his brain, the part of his brain that shut down, like there was no reason why he should have got the illness. There's no reason why he should have recovered the way he did. You know, like nothing was explainable. Yet he had this experience, and here he's a neuroscientist, a brain surgeon, all these things. He's like, this occurred, and it basically what it did, all the ways science explained what happens when we go into these states, to like say, oh, it's just our hallucinations and da-da-da. The list that he used to say to people when they would say, oh, I had this experience, he'd be like, oh, well, that was just this. He's like, it basically crossed off every single thing on my list that how I would explain away what was happening, you know? And so after reading that book and just like trying, because I could never really fully digest this idea that if I'm, you know, the Course in Miracles talks, there's no birth, there's no death. We are eternal. There's no beginning. There's no end. We're just like, this is my coat as Cory today. And if I die, I take my coat off and I'm just somewhere else. And, you know, that's a big commitment to say or to like really align with and stand behind.
Yeah.
But for me, again, it's the thing that makes it makes sense to me. It brings me more peace. It's easy for me to transcend my conditioning, to not be locked down by my healing or by my lack of healing, to like, because there's a bigger picture at work here.
Right. And that we have access to that bigger picture because it exists within us and it is us.
Right.
So I think being hopeful or having hope is such an important thing in our lives.
Yeah.
And for individuals that are really bogged down with things like depression or anxiety or labels around mental illness or conditions that they've been struggling with, hopelessness is a big part of that.
Yeah.
Feeling like you are this person, this label.
This is it, and this is my story. This is where I
am my trauma, right?
Yeah.
And that there's no way for me to be anything other than this. But when we think about the fact that there's that level of the self, there's the layer of conditioning, the way in which we act in the world, there's the level of the self where we're thinking, you know, we have our rational, not always rational, but cognitive mind. But that there's actually there's more than just this, but that there's a layer
there's
behind
another
that.
layer behind it.
Yes.
Yeah. And so I think that for a long time, I would always say, like, if it's all wooey and BS and you're happier and you die and the lights just go off, then whoop-de-doo, right? Like, or I could be stuck in my pain and my suffering and not set myself free and believe because of my story I'm not worthy of love, and I'm you know, I don't get the opportunity, and I don't have the like what he came back with, Ibn Alexander, from that book was what his summary was, that basically you're loved unconditionally. So that love that I talked to you about seeing for our children, well, I'm not seeing, it's not me that's offering that love to the children or to my child. It is the truth of who that child is loved no matter what, right? And so if I come through a story of trauma or pain or where I was rejected by my family or something like that, it transcends that to say that you're loved no matter what your human experience says. Now, it also says, the other part he said was, you have nothing to fear. Basically, there's nothing to be afraid of. And if we live from that place of believing that, okay, I'm just going to take this coat off and I'm going to be somewhere else anyways, takes away a lot of the urgency in our life, or the fear-based way that we live.
Like that if this doesn't end,
Yeah.
is that what you mean? Like if this
Yeah.
life doesn't necessarily end here, and that
Yeah.
our essence or our being is a continuum.
Is a continual kind of thing.
Right.
Then what's to fear, right? Why wouldn't I just live my life to the fullest in whatever way that I could? Because I got nothing to fear, right?
Oh, interesting. And so then the essence, or
Yeah.
the what you're talking about, seeing our children and like feeling that experience,
Yeah.
what we call love,
Yeah.
is actually just them being themselves.
Yeah.
And so that love exists as a basic for all. Like we are love. Is that what you're saying?
Essentially, that is like, there's certain things that in my mind allow me to connect to that. But that thing is there no matter what, whether I connect to it or not.
Or whether
right?
I label it as
whether
love
I label
or
it or
a
not,
feeling.
whether I say I love my child or whether I say he's an awful child, that doesn't actually decide what he is. Therefore, that's the same thing as occurring for me, right? So then I can't, there's no, even though the experience is, oh, my parents don't love me, or was an ideal, situation I grew up in, but that doesn't change whether I'm loved or not, right? And so if I can connect to that higher essence of love, which is what happens with breathwork, yoga, meditation, we remember
Counseling,
right, there is nothing to fear. I'm okay right in here. There's a beautiful house right inside my heart that I'm free, that isn't conditioned, right? Mm-hmm. And so, when we can connect to that place, it's like, it's just a way more peaceful experience.
Yeah, and it's such a validating experience, and that's when we get, maybe the word addicted isn't the word, but like where we get called back again and again and again to this practice. I mean, like that's how I came to this place as a counselor. Was because I started doing yoga at 17 years old, dealing with all sorts of, body issues, body dysmorphia, eating disorder stuff. And then I started to find this place within myself that felt okay. And if it was only for a minute, that was okay. It was a minute, right?
A breath.
A breath. And you're like, oh, wow, actually, I kind of love myself in this moment, or I'm okay with myself, or I'm accepting myself. And then that's the call to the journey. Oh, there's more there.
Yeah.
I can investigate. And then I think the biggest challenge for us as humans is actually getting past that place of cognition, that place of defining our experience, that place of living as if we are our trauma, as if we are our past.
Or our body.
Or our body. That's a huge one. Our pain that we're experiencing physically, or the way that we look. And let's be real, that space is really difficult to get out of.
Very.
And for some people more than others, depending on the types of things that you've experienced in your body and your life.
Yeah.
So, it's not this easy thing for all of us where we're like, oh, connected to higher self, feeling divine, God is with me, let's go.
It's been my most uncomfortable part of my life, that journey to finding that, because it does mean we have to, we have to face whatever we're afraid of. We have to look at whatever our pain is, right? But when we realize, like, what's the alternative? I'm either condemned by my pain, or my pain is my doorway to peace or freedom, right? And most people don't go on a healing journey because they're bored on a Sunday afternoon. Most people go on a healing journey because they're locked in pain or suffering in some form, right? And so, it's not, none of it is easy. Staying stuck in it's not easy. Learn healing through it's not easy.
Exactly.
But who said it's supposed to be easy?
No,
right? I think
suffering is a
definite part of the human experience,
Yeah.
right? And it's the acceptance of whatever our experience is, so that we can transcend it on some level to get to that place of hopefully more harmony and more peace is. I think the goal, I guess, I don't know.
The acceptance piece, man, that is difficult. And in counseling, I don't know if you experience this, and it's the message that I hate to give.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
Where you're like, okay, so what if we were to move into a place of accepting this, whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
Chronic pain, or that this trauma happened, or that you're feeling shitty about yourself? What if we just like, instead of avoiding it and pushing it away, what if we just like created a little bit of space here beside us?
Or like feeling like we need to change it.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because that is like, that's it. It's like, oh, I have these negative thoughts. Like, okay, well, how do I counter them with positive thoughts? Like, well, no, if I have this pain, it's like, oh, I have to acknowledge that I have pain, because chances are that somebody couldn't be there for me or be that compassionate person that I needed. And so I have to learn to be that for myself, right?
Yes.
That accepting part of it's like, oh, this is my story. This is my experience. And I can wish to have someone else's story or someone else's experiences, but that doesn't, Gerald Jampolsky, was it the forgiveness book? Was it Gerald Jampolsky? I can't remember who wrote the book on forgiveness, but it's like my favorite statement of forgiveness is giving up the hope for a different past.
Ooh, I like that.
And so like no longer hoping it happened differently, and just like finding forgiveness, and like forgiveness is like your pathway to acceptance, right? It's just like, oh, if I can just forgive whatever that experience is, if I can give up my hope for a different past and be in what is now, is like the, that's just such a beautiful, like giving up hope for a different past. And it's a perfect explanation of finding forgiveness, which leads to acceptance, so that we can, work from where we are, not
Cory, that's
wish we were someone
beautiful.
different.
We need to find out what book that is so I can put it in
Yeah,
the
so
notes.
it is the Book of Forgiveness, and I believe it's Gerald Jampolsky, but
I'll look it up and put it in the show notes.
I think that's correct.
Yeah, that's so profound. And I've been thinking a lot about this. I've been listening to a podcast called Bliss and Grit.
Yeah.
And it's two counselors, but also somatic experiencing practitioners, and they have a podcast on lots of different things. But one of the things that they've talked about recently is this obsession that we have with changing, like growth, right?
Yeah.
Especially in the counseling psychology world, where it's like, oh, so what is it that you're experiencing? Anxiety, depression. Okay, so let's do some cognitive restructuring so we can change these thoughts, and we can, there's one thing about getting people to a place of stability for sure, and there's things that we can do to support that. But I am just not sold on this thing about, and I say this a lot to the clients and people I work with, it's like, I'm just not sold that we can affirm our way out of things.
Right.
And I'm just not sold that we should focus on the thoughts that we're trying to change.
Right.
Yeah. I think we should accept them, but focusing to try to like spray them with what's it called when you're trying to get rid of vermites and stuff that. Like pesticide. You're like, okay, that really crappy thought, I don't want it. We're gonna get rid of it. I'm gonna
when
change,
you look at this, so that's almost like Western medicine style, right? Like, how do we cut that tumor out?
Yes.
Versus go, okay, this is the result. The pain's back here, and it comes out as this expression. So how do we get back to the basis of the pain, so that we can find acceptance and forgiveness with it? Then the expression of who I am, is different.
Yes.
And so I only think of that in a way of like, I really noticed it. So for my 39th year, I decided to quit alcohol, to like let go of alcohol. So I'm a year and a half since I let that go. And what I really realized when I let go of alcohol was how much it was a medication for pain. Right? So whether it was physical pain, emotional pain, like I thought, I started drinking in high school on weekends and really just continued that pattern because I just thought that, well, that's what we did. We just drank on weekends, right? Yeah. Like it was just party time.
That's how you cut loose.
Yeah, and went through times where I probably drank more and drank less. But I really noticed in the last year and a half that it was just like, it just wasn't serving me the way I was using alcohol. And so when I let it go, I realized like, oh, it's medicine for pain. And then I have a family that, that's how we get together. We get together and we have drinks, and I see like, oh, like I could really start to see the pain that everybody was medicating. And then really noticing like how many men that are, in midlife, my age, in my group of friends, like how many of them don't have some sort of, it's either weed by the day or every other day, or alcohol, at least a drink or two, right? It's like, oh, so we're all medicating some sort of pain. And when I decided to let it go, it was actually quite easy for me I mean, there was times that were harder that I felt like I really connected to, I'm actually more of an anxious person than I thought I was, and really had this learning that occurred for me. But what I realized was that because of the work that I've been doing for so long, when I let it go, it wasn't that challenging. Like I was like, okay, I've been managing my pain, or learning to deal with my pain, learning to accept myself. And so when I let it go, it wasn't that challenging. But to really understand that, these people are there's pain there, right? And so when people are like, I want to, whether it's, it's New Year's, so it's like people are changing their bodies, they're changing their food, but they're trying to eliminate bad food, or eliminate alcohol, or eliminate drugs, but they're not managing the pain. And so what happens is the pain shows up, and then it's like, why do we go back to our stuff? Well, because we haven't managed it from the source, right? That's
right. Yes.
And which is a huge part of just acceptance, is such as acceptance and forgiveness. Those two things, Kyle and I have just, we've been talking in probably the last 5 days. She's had something come to her about forgiveness every single day, and she's like, okay, I guess that's the theme of 2020 is of acceptance and forgiveness. And
I like that theme. I'm on it.
Yeah.
Acceptance and forgiveness.
Yeah, because it's such a beautiful thing to understand that if I feel any sort of desire to make someone wrong, or attached to some form of suffering, it's due to some form of lack of forgiveness or acceptance of what is, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we heal from that level, then the symptoms that show up later are just they're just not as big or dramatic, or they're way more manageable when you come back to that root cause, rather than trying to change it on the symptom level to say, you need to change your thoughts. It's like, or I understand, okay, what are the conditions that created this thought, so that I can change the soil in the garden rather than try and change the fruit once it's already grown.
Yes.
Yeah.
Beautiful. Yes, I totally agree with that 100%. And I think that for me personally on my journey, that has been the learning that I've gone through. Like, I've done counseling where I've focused on my habits and my thoughts, and I'm not getting anywhere. All it created was more hate for my past, more hate for the people that created pain within me. Yeah. And more frustration with myself for not being able to change my habits. Yeah. And feeling even more fucked up because I'm like, look, I'm a broken person. I have all these intentions to change these things.
All these things I need to fix, and it's so hard.
It's so hard, and I'm not fixing them, and I keep failing. And then I started, my journey was, there's yoga and meditation, but then I started doing things like somatic experiencing, which is a type of a nervous system therapy that really changes just the way your nervous system functions. Right. And EMDR, which is a therapy that I do with clients, which is, again, it's changing the soil. It's changing the programming. It's what happens in EMDR is people, through the process of EMDR, start to have forgiveness for these experiences that they identified as painful, and these experiences that we've identified as being the creation or the creator of these cognitive patterns. Right. Yeah, right. So it always comes back to some sort of trauma. Yeah. And for me, that was the key. Right. And then all of a sudden I start looking at my life and I'm like, I'm not doing that thing anymore. Right. Yeah. And then it happens without thinking. Yeah. It just happens. Yeah. And it's not forceful. And it's like my life has changed in these small ways because the pain has changed. Yeah. And I think our life can actually be really easy when we hit it from that level. And one of the biggest things that I always share when I came through when I did my self-empowerment training 20 years ago, I remember going to my parents' house for dinner after, and I sat in that room, and my whole family was there, and I looked, and they were different people. I was sitting in a room with different people. Nobody did any work except me. And it was just like, how are all these people so different? I was like, because I healed something in me. And that's how it's like, we change the world by doing our own healing, because we will live in a different world when we don't have that same pain that we've had in the past. And it was just so bizarre. It was mind-blowing to me, because I was just like, what? These people are so different. Nobody changed except me. And we focus so much, when we're not in that place, on our partners or our family. It's a helpless way to try and be like, you need to be different. I need to set boundaries with you. And, there's a big thing about boundaries and all this stuff that people, that I see a lot on social media and stuff like that. It's like learning to set boundaries. And those are all important things, but those are all like the chicken or the dog barking, right? When I realized I needed to set that boundary within me,
then all of a sudden I wouldn't even have to set it out there, because those people would walk up and they go, oh, that's his edge. I know where his boundary is. He doesn't even have to tell me.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And so it's less of that external, you need to change and, you know, all that, and really that change within, and then naturally people just know, right?
Yeah, because you're
The
changed.
way you hold yourself. You're
Yes.
just different, right?
And we have mechanisms within ourselves, our physiology,
Yeah.
that picks up on that stuff,
People
right?
read that stuff. That's exactly.
Always your body language.
Yeah. So,
And yeah.
So like the like creating the wrong partner in our life, or having a parent that's always stepping on our toes, you know, it's like we can try and pick the right person in our life, or we can try and make our parents change or our family change. But, you know, that's a very that's like standing on the bridge and trying to change the river, versus like being the river and just changing the path that you're on. Then all of a sudden you don't go under that bridge anymore. You know, it's like this ability to get so much done, but you have to do it in here.
You have to do it inside.
Which is facing yourself, which is
very difficult.
Yeah. And I think lots of people start on a healing journey and they're like, okay, I'm going to have my 6 sessions or my 3 sessions or whatever it is. I'm going to fix this little problem within me, and away I go. And it's like, oh, like, just a heads up, I've been at it for 20 years and I'm not fixed yet. I'm way happier.
Yeah.
And I don't feel like I'm broken anymore.
Yeah.
But the journey has been, and maybe it's not lifelong for everybody, but
it's a practice,
my own
though.
experience is it's a total practice. And it's not until I committed to the practice that things actually start to change. You know? It's like, what's the next book to read? It's like, well, what if the first book I read, what if I just mastered and practiced the one book? You know, I probably would have been way ahead, rather than reading 60 books, all telling me the same information, me hoping that there's like some hack, some easy way to do it, some way around doing the real work, which is, you know, consistently facing yourself and realizing, like, I wake up afraid every day. I tell that to my clients all the time. I wake up afraid every single day, no matter how much I connect to love the day before, and I align with peace, and I align with all the good stuff. I wake up the next morning and I'm paralyzed with fear again. And I have to sit with myself, and I have to work at diminishing the fear, and I work at welcoming the love or the light back into my life so that I can feel peace today. I know tomorrow I'm going to wake up afraid again. And when I can accept that, I don't feel like, oh, I'm not getting it. When's this going to go away? When am I not going to have to deal with my ego? It's like, oh, okay, it's the conditioning. I'm afraid. I'm going to wake up afraid. I'm going to manage it as best I can, go to sleep tonight, and probably wake up afraid again tomorrow.
Yes. Yes. And you know what? It sounds like, I've had people say to me, oh, that just sounds depressing. To me, it sounds like freedom.
Freedom, absolutely.
It's freedom, because I know too, after years of doing this work, I'm still anxious, or whatever we want to call it, fearful. I still have the same hang-ups that I did before I put all the money into the counseling and the books and the podcast and the master's degree. But the thing is now, I'm not ashamed by it.
Yeah.
It doesn't define me.
No.
And I know it's coming.
Yeah.
And I'm like, hey, hello.
Yeah,
I
here
see
it is.
you there.
Hi there. There you go. Thanks for the information.
Oh, that's you again.
Yeah.
Here we go. And it's a practice, like we said. It's something that you deal with for the rest of your life. And like, this is, again, the bad news or good news, whatever you want to say, that I bear to the people I work with. It's like, it's work. It's uncomfortable. You're going to deal with it for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it may never go away.
And acceptance is a big part of it. And they're like, so I'm paying you to tell me that this is it?
This is it.
Yeah, but it's not it, because you can go inside. And I also wanted to say, for those listening, that there's many ways to get to that deeper pain, right?
There's so many pathways.
Everybody tries to sell, or there's a lot of things selling, like, this is the way to heal yourself. And I've found many different modalities, yoga, meditation, EMDR, somatic experiencing, satir therapy that we did. There's more. There's so much more. And we all have our own journey and path that we can take to uncover that pain. So there's no one way to do it.
No. And that's the great thing, is that like, there's so much pain in the world, and there's so much love in the world, right? And there's so many different pathways through. And I think that is our journey, is like understanding our pain and then finding our pathway to freedom with our pain. Mm-hmm. And everybody has a different path that they're going to take. And some are correct for some people, and some are not correct. And there's a really beautiful movement, I think, of just like this opening up to mental health and understanding, like, if we don't have our mental health, what do we have, right? We don't have anything. It's like, it's totally normal for me to pay for my whole life to have a gym membership, but for people to normally, like, to normalize the fact that you may have to go and see somebody, or you may have to do some form of mental health for your entire life, that's not a normal thing for people yet.
No, you must be really screwed up.
Yeah.
Right? Even if you're going to counseling.
Yeah. Well,
you must be really messed up.
That's what I say. I'm like, I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm like, so I'm either the most messed up guy in the room, but I got lots to offer because I've worked through a lot of stuff, or I'm the smartest guy in the room that's like, hey, I'm going to proactively focus on my mental health so that I can grow beyond my own limitations or my own, conditioning or my own story. But I think that I believe that there's a younger group of people coming up that it's like, it's cool to say, hey, my therapist told me, or, it's really, it's not shunned. Like, oh, you're going to a therapist. Like, oh, really? Like, oh, what did they give you? It's an exciting thing to understand that, oh, hey, like, it's okay to invest in your mental health. And I always think of this story. Kyle and I were driving like these awful old vehicles, yet we were spending, $300 or $400 a month on mental health at the beginning of our relationship. And I just remember it because for lots of people it comes up, my practice is all privately funded. You have to pay for your own, your own work. But I remember that for me, it was like, well, I can be happy driving my old 1990 Dodge diesel pickup and feel fulfilled and not, and invest in me, or I can invest in a nice new pickup and feel like I'm not worthy to drive it,
Yes.
And so I think as that shifts, that people understanding the value in investing in their own mental health, which I believe is occurring, I think it's a beautiful thing because what are we without our own mental health? We're, if we can't see, if that's the lens we put on every single day, if we can't see a clear world or a loving world around us, then it doesn't matter how much stuff we have
and then look what happens to the world, right? So it has a ripple effect as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
So I'm just being conscious of our time. We still have
Yes.
more time,
Okay.
but don't worry.
Okay.
But there's a few things that I want to get to.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you talk about a challenge that you might be experiencing? Or is there a question that you really want to talk about that I gave you that you're feeling like you felt like, I want to talk about this?
I mean, I can talk about a challenge if you want. That I'm easy. I like the idea of they all kind of lead to the same thing. All the questions you asked me. So
okay, so the two questions that I'm really interested in, and maybe we only have time for one, is a challenge that you're dealing with right now and how you're working through it, or what you think our biggest challenge is as a community, society, and our way forward.
Right. Okay. So I'll talk about the one challenge I face every single day.
Okay.
And it's the one challenge that I think we're facing as a society moving forward.
Okay.
And it's the thing that I'm passionate about. So.
Okay, let's do it. You got it. Let's do it.
So I got it all. So I think that the challenge that I work on, or the thing that I face, is what I shared with you. I wake up afraid every single day.
Afraid of what?
I wake up afraid, whether it's am I going to have enough money? Am I providing my children with the skills that they need to be the confident, loving men that I would love for them to be? Am I, finances, children? Am I spending enough time at home? Am I spending enough time in my business? Am I doing it right?
Just doubt, fear.
All of it. Just all of that fear-based thinking.
Okay.
And so that's a challenge that I face every single day. And I do have a practice every single day of waking up, feeling afraid, giving myself at least. Sometimes the kids are blowing around. Like, I'm not sitting quietly in a room meditating most of the time. I'm, in the middle of getting ready for school and life. And I sit down and the kids understand, oh, Dad's doing his reading. That's what I do. I sit down and I do my reading and I focus on removing that fear, whatever it is.
So is it a meditation?
It's a meditation. It's a reading from the Course in Miracles, which is some form of basis on, that book is the diminishment of fear and aligning with love.
Is that a book people can access, the Course of Miracles?
Yeah, the Course in Miracles. And so it has a 365-day workbook. And that's what I'm on like just about a year and a half of it, that every day there's a different lesson. And it's essentially a different form of taking our thought system, which is fear-based, and our conditioning and everything in our world around us is all fear-based. I'm not enough, kind of the advertising. So, so it's basically taking that old conditioning and shifting it into a basis of love, looking at, I'm supported, I'm loved, everything's going to work out, I'm safe, I'm, all the, so the diminishment of fear and the injection of love. And so that's what I work on within myself every single day. And for a long time in my life, I felt like a lot of, like, I was trying to make life happen. I was trying to make my business happen. I had to make the world happen. And it all came from fear, right? Because if I didn't make the world happen, then what, right? If I don't give my children the right skills, then what? So shifting that thought system to love says, what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus on what I'm afraid of today, and I'm going to imagine it absorbed with love or with peace. I'm going to dissolve that fear, and then I'm going to go throughout my day. And so coming down to waking up every day, what am I afraid of? I don't have to look at this giant picture of what I need to achieve later in life. Am I doing it right? Am I enough? I know that if I can regulate my fear-based thinking today, then I'm going to be set up in the best way I can for tomorrow. Because when I come from love, I make really wise choices. I make really supportive choices that are for me, for the environment, for my community, for my children, for my family. And when I come from fear, I don't always make those kind of choices. And so what has had to happen is I've had to dissolve the long-term picture or the fear-based track and really bring it down to looking at my feet where they are right now and ask, how do I dissolve that fear today? And really that is what I feel passionate about. That's
beautiful, Cory. I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm sitting here and really absorbing this because, I'm as all of us do.
Yeah.
I've been in that place many times every day. Right. And you're right. I hear you saying when we make choices from a place of love, or as you're saying love, I'm thinking of groundedness, or being in myself, or in, which is presence, love, it's, or God, or whatever, that we choose so differently, right? And when I have that trust about my business, that I'll have clients, or that, my day is so different.
Yeah, you're free, right?
The days that I wake up and I'm like, oh God, I have to write more blog posts or do more marketing, or I'm I'm a horrible mother, or whatever, then you're just your day is ruined because you're just in such a stress state.
Yeah. And it's tricky because even, with this training that we're coming out that we're presenting, there's a lot of things that need to happen. And I sometimes get afraid, right? I'm am I doing all the right things? And then I'm I can dissolve the fear and I'm at peace now. And it's oh, but am I not? My ego pops in oh, but are you not worried about the things you're supposed to be worried about? So, but really that's the essence of what everything that I do so this comes from what I feel passionate about is dissolving fear with my clients that come work with me, the trainings that we teach. It's all about dissolving this fear-based mindset and operating from a place of abundance, of fullness, of that the universe is how I see it. So if I see it as an abundant, full, loving space, then that is the experience that I'm going to have in it. And so when we start to shift that within ourselves, then we run a business that looks at the world that way. Then we have clients that get to shift that within themselves, and then they get to shift that within their families. And, it just becomes this big movement of dissolving fear and injecting love. And I think that's the root of, so much pain is the obsession with fear, or the fear that's been conditioned into everything and all of us and every part of us, this belief that we're not enough. And yet on the other side of it, the truth is that we are enough, and we are whole, and the universe is abundant, even if our experience isn't providing that for us right now, or it doesn't feel like it's providing that for us.
Or in the past it didn't.
Right? And so as I dissolve that fear, I do get to see from the present moment, which is the present truth, that I live in an abundant universe and I have an abundant life, and I'm already full. I don't need to strive for anything other than, that's the realization. I don't need to strive for anything other than finding peace again today, and then finding peace again tomorrow,
and being you,
and being me,
and being
that is my only job, is to be that free expression of me. And so that's kind of an after factor. That's what occurs when we dissolve the fear. We become us, right? We become who we are. And that's, so there's Eben Alexander's book, and then Anita Morjani was Dying to Be Me, and she had a really similar experience.
I've heard of this book, yes.
And so her message that she came back with is like, your only job is to be you in this universe. And then Eben Alexander's were like, you're unconditionally loved, you have nothing to fear. And I wish I could remember the third one. You have nothing to fear, you're unconditionally loved. And maybe it was along the lines of your job is to be you. You know, to be your uninhibited expression of you. And when we align to that stuff, it's just like you can feel it in the room right now. It's just like freedom, right?
Freedom.
And so being free from the confines of whatever our conditioned mind tells us, that's my goal. That's my passion. That's what I hope to provide a space for my clients to find that within themselves with the work that I do. I hope that for my children, that they can feel free to be them. Like, if you think of like, I feel like I'm really starting to understand this at 40. I'm like, oh, what if I knew this as a child? What if I knew this? What if I could be free for my whole experience? Then what would that be like, And so my hopes is to offer a piece of that to my children and to the people that I get to work with.
And then there's, like you said, it's just such a ripple effect.
Yeah.
In our communities and our lives. Yeah. It's so beautiful to hear. You have such a beautiful way of speaking about this stuff, Cory. And I think a lot of people need to hear this, even if it makes them a little bit uncomfortable to talk about some of these things that we, God, higher self.
You had to go there.
We have to.
Yeah.
We have to, because it's out there, and you see it on your Facebook feed. People are posting stuff about it. We're in a time where we're being called to really look at this stuff, whether it's our mental health, whether it's spirituality. I see it. I don't think it's just in the people I hang out with. I think we're actually in a world now where this conversation's coming up, and we need to dive into it. So I so appreciate you going there with me and sharing your experience and your passion. And so if people are interested in connecting with you, how can they do that? So I know you're on social media.
I am on social media.
What's your Instagram handle?
My Instagram is just Cory at Cory Erlandson. And so I'm there, Cory Erlandson on Facebook. I have like my normal page, and then I have like a business page for myself. And that's the one that I do all my, I do 10-minute, like 6 days a week, I do a 10-minute little blog post about whatever way I'm removing fear from myself that day and focusing on injecting love. So thank you. So there's that. And then we also have Breath Integration has a page on there. And Breath Integration Kamloops.ca is the website for the business that I run. So, and there's many ways to access me, and you can message me or however you like. Yeah.
Perfect. And the podcast isn't up and going right now?
No, we haven't been consistently rocking it. That's not to say it's not going to happen again.
Okay.
But it is called Be a Man Podcast. There's a few episodes on there. We're just talking about, it could sound like be a man, but it's, it's talking about the other today's man, of what we're, the expectations that we have upon ourselves, or, the change that's occurring for women and men. It's probably too late to get into this, but, it's about talking about just being a man today, and the emotional grounds that, we're all in, and
Cool. That is something that, maybe if I have you on again, we can dig into.
Yeah, absolutely.
My first episode with my friend Gerald, he talks a lot about toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
And I've recently had I wouldn't say big, but I've had young men coming to my practice for support.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful thing to see these young men that are like, I am going to get in touch with my emotions, heal this stuff. And so there's a huge need. So I'm going to challenge you guys. I know you're doing, do you do it with a friend?
Yeah.
You guys need to get that back up and going. There's a huge need for it. There's a lot of men that want to be having this conversation.
Yeah.
And I see it everywhere right now with the men that I'm talking to.
Yeah.
So
And I've got a ton of men into my practice recently too. So there's definitely a movement here happening where the men are starting to join the table.
Yeah.
Self-help and personal development, personal growth, whatever you want to call
Yay.
it.
So, okay, great.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's a pleasure. Okay, talk soon.